Greetings from Boston. I hope everyone is doing wonderfully. Some followers over on Twitter, as well as some commenters here on YouTube, have asked that I address the controversy surrounding the fifth set no tiebreaker rule at Wimbledon, which applies incidentally at the Australian Open and the French Open as well. This year, the fifth set no tiebreak rule at Wimbledon produced some especially exhausting and somewhat absurd results. As a consequence, there's been some controversy as to whether Wimbledon should retain the no tiebreak rule, but what's missing in these debates, I think, is the proper historical context for this issue. So what I'm going to do today is provide you with the necessary historical context of tiebreaks and the no tiebreak rule. Next, I'm going to lay out the pros and cons of the no tiebreak rule in the fifth set in the modern context. Finally, I'll hazard some proposed revisions to the scoring rules, which I believe address the criticisms currently being leveled at the no tiebreak rule. So subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up. This is Tennis Talk Daily. Operating in a historical vacuum, one might get the impression that tiebreaks are the norm and that Wimbledon has carved out an exception in the fifth set with the no tiebreak rule. But in fact, as a historical matter, the truth is just the reverse. The norm right up until the 1970s was no tiebreaks. All sets were played as so-called advantage sets. The concept of a tiebreak was invented in 1965 by James Van Allen, a tennis official and the founder of the International Tennis Hall of Fame. Allen's original tiebreak was a so-called sudden death tiebreak or 9-point tiebreak. The first player to 5 won the set, and it didn't matter whether you had a 2-point margin. One significant impetus for instituting tiebreaks in Grand Slams was a first-round match at Wimbledon in 1969 between Pancho Gonzalez, who was in his 40s, and Charlie Pasarell. Gonzalez ended up winning the match, but lost the first 2 sets, 22-24, and then won 6. But he took the last 3 sets, 16-14, 6-3, 11-9. The match lasted 5 hours and 12 minutes over 2 days. A number of the seasoned players, including Rod Laver, did not like the sudden death tiebreak. They developed and favored the 12-point tiebreak, which is what we have now. Wimbledon instituted the 12-point tiebreak in 1972, except in sets that would determine the match. And in 1979, Wimbledon instituted the current rule, which is tiebreaks at 6-6 in all sets except the fifth set. With that historical context in mind, I want to make a few observations about so-called overtime fifth sets under the no tiebreak rule. The first point is that overtime sets under the no tiebreak rule rarely happen, particularly in the final rounds, by which I mean the quarterfinals and beyond. Another significant point about these overtime fifth sets under the no tiebreak rule is that the matches tend to involve the big servers, by which I mean really the serve bots. I mean Isner, I mean Querrey, Karlovic, Muller, and even Cilic to some degree. All of those individuals have gone overtime in the fifth quite often. This year, something happened that was quite unprecedented. In the final stages, there were 3 matches that went into overtime in the fifth set. An outcry began in earnest after the Anderson versus Isner semifinal match, which went to 26-24 in the fifth set. But the critical background for understanding the outcry was the Anderson versus Federer quarterfinal, which went to 13-11 in the fifth set. There were some Fed fans who believed that the overtime set actually contributed to Federer's loss, and I think there's really no question that it did, although I would say that Federer lost this match at a couple of other points as well that have nothing to do with the fifth set no tiebreak rule. I don't think there's any question that the no tiebreak rule contributed to John Isner's loss against Kevin Anderson, and of course to Anderson's loss against Djokovic in the final, and by extension to Djokovic's win. Most of the arguments we're hearing on this issue are arguments against the no tiebreak rule, but there are arguments in favor. favor. First, in big-ticket matches, it just doesn't seem right to, by design, make the win hinge on just 1 or 2 points, really. In this respect, the no tiebreak rule keeps blind luck at bay to some extent. Second, the no tiebreak rule requires that one of the players come up with a strong return game. Is that so much to ask? By the same token, the rule actually punishes the one-dimensional servers, the serve bots, as it were. So for those of you who don't want serve bots in tennis, you should think twice about advocating against the no tiebreak rule. Finally, tradition weighs in favor of retaining the no tiebreak rule in the 5th set. For almost a century, tennis was doing just fine without tiebreaks. There were no serious problems. And remember, all sets were played without tiebreaks. All sets were so-called advantage sets. Moreover, the no tiebreak rule, as I was mentioning before, affects only a small number of players. But there are many arguments against the no tiebreak rule. It can produce endless matches and therefore, to some degree, absurdity. There's also the scheduling problems that it produces. At a certain point, moreover, the spectators just want the match to end, which puts the players in the awkward position of playing to a crowd who doesn't want to be there. Another important observation is that at some point in these overtime sets under the no tiebreak rule, it becomes primarily a test of endurance rather than skill. Is that really what we want? And if we're going to have a test of endurance, there should be at least a finish line somewhere. Even marathon runners have a finish line, folks. Finally, in extreme cases, these overtime 5th sets under the no tiebreak rule can affect a player's ability to perform in subsequent matches. Certainly, Kevin Anderson could not bring his A game to the final against Djokovic, folks. It was just not possible given the amount of time he had to spend on the court in his previous 2 matches. On balance, I think there are more and better arguments against the no tiebreak rule in the 5th set than there are arguments in favor of it. So how do we fix it? Well, one proposal is to let the players go to 12-12 in the 5th set and then let them play a tiebreak. But I'm inclined to favor another option, which is to institute tiebreaks in all the sets at Wimbledon in all the matches, except the final 5th set. This would preserve the tradition to some degree. You wouldn't have overly exhausted players coming into the final. The stakes would be at their highest, which means that the players would be fighting hard all the way through that 5th set. It would be exciting for the audience. It would preserve the tradition, and I think it's the happiest compromise. Drop a comment and let me know what you think. I'd be very interested in your views on this. I do think that blaming Federer's loss on the no tiebreak rule goes a bit too far. But on the other hand, I think the rule needs revisions. Let me know what you think. I'll look forward to seeing you guys soon. Signing off from Boston.